Hello, I'm Ciaran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc sheep podcast. Each episode, we bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. With the breeding season kicking off on many farms, in this episode we'll discuss the pros, cons and alternatives to early lambing. I'm joined by Shane Moore. He's a farmer just outside Athleague in County Roscommon and is a participant in the Better Farm Sheep Programme. I'm also joined by Michael Gottstein, Head of Sheep in Teagasc. Shane has run an early lamb system for many years. He discusses why it initially suited his farming system, but why he's also moved away from it in recent years as sheep numbers increased on his farm. One of the challenges Shane's early lamb system presented was an increase in cost each year and conversely declining returns. Early lamb is characterised by a high sales price, but Michael takes us through the economics of the system and some of the hidden costs that's involved. As early lambs does provide a valuable source of cash flow on many dry stock farms, Shane discusses how he will offset this by switching over to carrying over late lambs for the hogger trade next spring. Beating continual supply is an important issue for the industry, and Michael discusses the role of store lambs being carried over as a way to meet this demand and how the practice is gaining in popularity on many farms. We start, however, with Michael outlining the key dates and key requirements for early lamb systems for 2021.
Well, so early lamb systems are generally defined by systems that start marketing lambs usually around Easter time. And Easter varies from year to year, and for the coming year 2021, Easter Sunday falls on the 4th of April. So realistically, people aiming to sell into that particular market really would need to have lambs available for slaughter from around the 29th of March, the week before Easter Sunday falls. So what's been happening in the last few years is that Ramadan, which is a Muslim festival, and it is also a big supply or requirement there for supply for lamb, is coming forward by 2 weeks every year. And in the coming year, in 2021, we see Ramadan starting on the 12th of April. So it's moving closer to that Easter period and probably increasing the demand for early lamb or for lamb in that particular period of time when we don't have a supply of lamb, spring lamb coming in.
It's potentially a bumper crop, but it's one that's going to be very challenging to meet at that time of the year, and I know we'll discuss some of the economics in more detail later, but it is moving a little bit earlier every year, so getting that supply ready is going to be quite challenging.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, if we look back maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Ramadan was out in July and August. It's moving earlier every year, and it's going to keep doing that. It moves forward by approximately 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks every year. So next year it's going to be heading into the end of March and moving there on. So look at it, I suppose, from an early lamb producer's point of view, it probably says that there is going to be quite a strong demand for spring lamb / hoggets in that kind of early April period as the markets get ready to supply spring lamb for Easter, and also sheep meat and lamb as well for the Ramadan period that's coming.
We might tease out some of them challenges in the next couple of minutes. Shane, if I just bring you in here for a moment, we might start just by giving a quick bit of background to where you're farming and what kind of numbers you're running.
I'm farming in Roscommon, just outside Athleague. I'm running a small suckler enterprise, about 10 to 15 cows and 150 ewes plus the lambs.
Shane, it's fairly typical of the area in Roscommon, so it is. You've been running an early lamb system for a number of years. It's changed slightly over the last number of years, but why was it working for you, or why were you running that system?
I suppose I was majority early lambs, and over the price was the biggest thing, and I suppose when the cost was taken into what the early lambs were costing from grass and meal, it just didn't really add up, and it was the problem was having lambs ready in time to get the high price. And
in the early part of Michael was saying like that date of getting lambs ready has come back earlier, so obviously the cost in doing it up. But I suppose there was benefits for you having that system on your farm, aside from the price. Like usually the lines we get thrown out is labour, it's shed space, there's other reasons thrown out. For you, why was it for a number of years working?
It was for shed space, because I don't have the shed space to lamb all the ewes. And as well as that, from cash flow, I suppose I had money coming in when early in the season when there was nothing else really coming in, kind of thing.
It balanced out with the suckler system as well.
Yeah, the sucklers were the majority being sold on the back end.
You kind of alluded to it there. You've moved away slightly. Like not all the ewes were in that early lamb system. If we went back 4 or 5 years, but the number you're putting every year is declining, and this year you've indicated that you're probably not going to go into it. Maybe you'll take us through why you've moved away from that system.
Well, I suppose the biggest thing from moving away from it is I'm hoping to put up a shed, and I will be able to lamb all my ewes in March time. Again, it's kind of cost, when you add up what it costs to sponge them to try and get them lambing early, it just doesn't, like, you're only talking €1 this year in the price wise. We'll say they were $6.70 this year. That's what was the highest price I took for my early lambs. So it just doesn't add up from a cost point of view.
Shane, like, one of the reasons you said about labour and, you know, maybe splitting or spreading that workload out a little bit, it's frequently something we get cited as one of the reasons to splitting a flock. Is there a bit of a balancing act in doing that too?
Yeah, there would be, because like when you're lambing your mid-season lambs, you still have to get time to go and feed the other bunch and go and check on them, and you would be dosing from your Mahadiras kind of when the ewes are kind of just near the end of their lambing, so there's workload with the early lambs.
You're probably starting to draft at that point as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's not really getting rid of the workload, like you have it in other ways, like
it's just spreading at different times.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're moving more towards a mid-season system. That balance is one of the issues we often get. You were lambing some ewes in March anyway. How did you manage keeping enough grass in front of the early flock and trying to keep the mid-season going, or was one basically robbing off the other?
Well, there would have been, yeah, but in the last number of years I kind of have set out a certain parcel of the farm for the early lambs, and they stayed there. That was whether there was grass on it or not, that's where they were kept. They didn't go in where the March lambers were going.
Yeah, the tendency going through. You mentioned there about your sales, you're well through them at the moment. The costs in it, you're getting a higher price obviously, but there is a cost associated with that. Was that one of the reasons you pulled back from it, or? Yeah,
it would be. Like, there'd be a very high cost meal wise to the lambs and the ewes, like in the early lambing.
Michael, I'll just bring you back in here for a moment. Like, that has been one of the big challenges in that system. Certainly there's a higher price, and as Shane has alluded, there are some benefits for housing and certainly cash flow at that time of year, but it comes at a cost.
Absolutely, and we've done a good bit of work in Teagasc looking at the cost of early lamb production and comparing them to mid-season lamb production systems. So we've looked at them on actual farms, like so in Shane's case and on some of the other better farms. We've also modelled it through our bioeconomic model, and what's basically coming out of those from those farms and from the models is that we really need about €2 per kilogram of a price difference to justify the extra cost in terms of extra meal, in terms of extra veterinary costs associated with sponging and hormone treatment of those ewes, in terms of forage costs, and in terms of the lower stocking rate that we can carry on the ground at that time of the year with the sheep. So when you look at all of those costs, for a farmer to embark on a early lamb production system running at a high level of efficiency and comparing that to a mid-season lambing system running at the same high level of efficiency on that farm, we would need about €2 per kilo of a price premium for the average lamb from the early lamb production system. So very often when we look at it, the initial price might be quite high. In Shane's case, he was saying it was €6.70. But the average price in Shane's case is €6.20. So on the basis of that, the average price of his mid-season lamb, would have to be $4.20, and we're quite confident that it'll come in well above that. So the reality is on a lot of farms, if we're doing figures and looking at it, it's other factors that are deciding why people are running early lamb systems. It's certainly not an economic factor because the market isn't returning that price premium. And
it's interesting you went through it there. Like, it's not just a simple sale price, meal cost. There is a hidden cost in many farms, and Shane indicated in latter years there he moved his early flock to a set block of ground so that it wasn't compromising the other flock. That's probably something that's not done on our farms, or the cost of the lack of grass, the later turnout for other stock is not taken into account.
Yeah, and we've looked at that on the better farms, even where there were small early lambing flocks, it reduced gross margin by €70 per hectare, even where only 10% of the flock of sheep were ran as an early lambing flock. And that was basically because there was an opportunity cost in the grass that those early ewes were eating. So it meant that cattle were turned out later, or there was less grass there for early lambing ewes, or for the mid-season lambing ewes. And also the early lambing flock had a lower output. Like for a lot of the very well-run and intensive mid-season flocks, they're scanning 2.1, maybe 2.2, winning 1.9. Or 1.8, and for the early lambing flocks, we're just not getting those levels of output. Even with the PMSG and the sponges, we're just not getting those levels of output. So there was multiple factors that are militating against the early lamb production system in terms of reducing the margin.
Shane, if I just come back to you for a moment, like Michael kind of alluded there, overall output or your system, and really early lamb flocks do determine a lot of what happens on the system on your farm. You've been increasing numbers. You indicated there you're building a shed to increase overall output. How much more do you think you will carry in a mid-season system over an early lamb system? Is it your overall output you kind of due to go up in the coming years, or your total sales?
Yeah, there will be. Yeah, I'd be pushing more lambs. Like we'll say the early lambs this year gone now. We'll say I weaned, or what I sold off the ewes was about 1.4, which Michael has kind of said it's lower. Whereas my mid-season ones, they weaned 1.75 or something like that. So, you have a higher output. You have a higher output on the mid-season lambs than you do in the early season lambs.
And in terms of overall stocking rate, you're pushing up numbers slightly too.
Yeah, the ewe numbers will be going up. Like at the moment, I'm hovering around. This year they're probably about 150 going to the ram. Hopefully with the shed next year will be closer to 200 ewes going to the ram plus ewe lambs.
Just one other thing, and it's interesting, you've commented on your system, ewe lambs being tipped. Cash flow is something you mentioned earlier. It's something we frequently hear on dry stock farms, that it suits cash flow at that time of the year. And when you look back at sales are generally limited on farms at that stage. And for you, it worked. Have you any plans to maybe replace that? Because there's usually a deficit there.
At the moment, the current plans is that the ewe lambs will be kind of left run over the winter period, and they'll be sold in late February, early March kind of thing. That their lambs will come in then for cash flow, kind of to replace what was the early lamb flock. So
you'll run them later lambs at a lower cost and carry them through the store market.
Yeah, they won't be pushed for the whole. They'll be just left there run over and block ground.
Michael, like that move to more hoggets being carried through into the year, there is a need to meet a throughput requirement every year. We have to keep a continual supply. Just from an industry point of view, it's probably a clinch time for supply as well. How do we balance that out?
Yeah, absolutely, Ciaran, and I think that's one of the challenges for the sheep industry. We have an all year round supply requirement. Okay, so it's not traditionally lamb was a seasonal product. But, the way that the markets have gone and the way that a lot of lamb now is being supplied directly to the retailers from our factories, there's a requirement there basically to be able to fill the shelf and to keep that shelf space in the supermarkets 12 months of the year. So they need supply, and it's times like Ramadan and Eid at the moment, and Easter, when there's big demand for lambs, that becomes challenging. And I suppose from that point of view, it's important that there is a lamb supply in that kind of late March, April and May period before the new season lamb really starts coming out in numbers. So that's the challenge for the industry. And I think by and large what we've seen over the last number of years, as the number of early lamb producers has reduced, we've seen the store lamb trade filling that gap. And there's quite a few people now who are specialising in buying light store lambs in the back end of the year, running them cheaply on grass, maybe even into January, and then basically starting to feed those lambs with the view to starting to market them in that kind of late February to mid-April period. And that's really what's filling that gap for us now, and that's going to become more important for the next couple of years with the way Easter and in particular Ramadan is moving forward. And
it's provided a very useful outlet for hill lambs at that time of year to carry them through. They're basically meeting a lot of that requirement.
Absolutely, yeah. So that and we've seen very strong store lamb prices, and we have seen store lamb finishers make good margins most years out of store lamb finishing if we go back over the last 10 years.
And just like Shane alluded to it there, one of the things he's considering is carrying them lighter lambs over. We're starting to see more farms looking at that option of maybe not pushing them into a declining market and giving them a chance to...
Absolutely, yeah. So quite a few of the farmers now are keeping maybe 50, 60 lambs, of these lighter lambs, the tail end lambs, often the ones from the old lambs that had twins maybe, lambs that grew that a little bit slower, and basically keeping them cheaply on grass. Again, very important that they don't eat all the grass that's on the farm during the closed period, so that they're managed in an area of deferred grazing and then maybe housed and finished indoors or finished outdoors on a particular block of ground that isn't going to be required for ewes in the springtime, an out farm or something like that. So there's quite a few people that are looking at that now as a system of basically finishing those lambs cheaply, getting them into a higher weight and a higher price. So a lot of store lamb finishers are going maybe to 23 kilos or 23.5 kilos, and getting that €5.50 or €6 a kilo in that kind of late February to April period. Those lambs are coming into 125, 130 euros, and there's meal gone into them for the last kind of 6 weeks of the finishing period, but they've been basically fed very cheaply on deferred grass. Very important that when we're doing that system, we don't let the lambs run all over the farm and eat the grass and rob the grass from the early or from the mid-season ewe flock, because in that situation we'd be no better off than if we ran an early ewe flock.
A bit of balance and thinking required for it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ciaran.
Thanks, Ciaran.
So we'll finish up at this point. Again, it's an interesting take on the systems, and it's interesting to see how Shane has switched around his system and is now looking at alternative means of carrying over lambs to meet that cash flow demand. Again, as with all enterprises on the farm, you need to weigh up its impact on the overall farmer system and profitability on it, and what works best on an individual farm. That's it for me. For any updates from the programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciaran Lynch. Thanks for joining us on this episode of OviCast. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to future episodes.